Tonight is Short, Walk On Girl might as well be the best movie ever made. If you're looking for a level-headed, objective analysis of this movie, then bye, see you later. I love this movie more than I love several members of my family. You're getting pure, unadulterated subjectivity with this video. Although the book and movie aren't ruined if you have their story spoiled, I still think you should jump into both of them knowing as little as possible. I prefer the movie, but both versions have their own merits, and their differences are why I was interested in making this video. I think you should check them out and come back, but it's not homework or anything. Do what you want.
Take a deep breath, deep breath, deep breath, deep breath. Let it go, let it out, let it go, let it out.
Based on the short stories by Tomohiko Morimi and directed by Masaaki Yuasa, Tonight is Short, Walk On Girl's film adaptation feels like reading a novel with an active imagination. Hearing the protagonist describe a sea of books, only for the screen to fill with water, depicting waves of pages and books flopping like fishes, feels like a specific description you'd find while reading, not while watching a movie. And if you can imagine, it's directly pulled from the novel and given life on the screen. Imagery like this usually doesn't go beyond the page when adapting written works to visual mediums, but most films would lose their sense of reality if visuals like this suddenly appeared. Animation is an inherently more surreal medium when compared to live-action movies, but even so, imagery like this feels more in line with Charlie Kaufman films, not Studio Ghibli ones. This is the only time the movie gets so literal with adapting the novel, but the point I want to make here is how this adaptation works with the change in medium. An advantage books have over films is the use of the reader's imagination, allowing us to create fantastical images that just wouldn't make sense in our reality. But this adaptation uses descriptions from the novel to showcase how the crew at Science Saru read the work, creating an experience that almost feels like reading a book through someone else's eyes. I'm not going to assume that was the goal of the movie, but I wanted to mention it because it's cool! Alright? Got a problem with that? Adaptations in general are difficult because you lose the tools and benefits of the original's medium. I feel that boring adaptations of novels usually happen because the creators translate the plot without substituting the imagination of the reader. There isn't a single correct way to adapt a written work, but the new version needs to add something that wasn't available in the source material, or why else would you consume this version over the other? In the case of this adaptation, we have meaningful additions to the source material that feels like a more cohesive experience when compared to the original novel. The 4 short stories of the original are combined into taking place over a single night instead of an entire year, and I feel like this is one of the most important changes, but I'll get more into that later. I first want to focus on this shot from the movie. Snail shells that spiral into train wheels before she's inspired to go on her adventure. In the novel, she thinks to herself, "I want to drink," further extrapolating with, "Unfortunately, the connection between the snails and alcohol still evades me." While the version of Otome in the source material struggles to understand what drives her on this adventure, the version of her in the film seems to know, even if it is only on a subconscious level. Later on, we learned that as a young girl, Otome adored a book called Ratatatam, a children's book about a train. In the movie, trains are symbolic of Otome's one-track mind, but also of her persistence to keep moving forward. Shortly after, she is seen dancing like a train, and later in the film, when she remembers about the book, she makes a similar movement. The movie also makes the point that she forgets about the book for a long time, so it seems that she picked up on this imagery and train habits unconsciously. In the film, Otome doesn't understand the connection either, but the movie does, and someone who has already seen the film before can connect the dots. The spiral of shells reminds her of the shape of a train wheel, which in turn reminds her of Ratatatam, which is a story about a train going on an adventure, thus inspiring her to go on her own adventure. Although all of this information could be found in the original novel, it wasn't until the adaptation that the connections were made. The movie is filled with moments like this. Connecting established information from the source material in a new way. But I also want to emphasize that the original still has its own merits. The movie makes meaningful changes because most of these elements wouldn't translate well into animation. The book has moments where the dual narrators of Senpai and Otome finish each other's sentences, as if they are reflecting on the events that brought them here together. I think this is a really cute method of telling a story, but it would be pretty distracting if in the movie every scene change accompanied an inner monologue. This doesn't make a huge difference, but there are a lot of bigger changes that happen in the third part of the movie. The core plot of Don Underwear writing a play for his fated lover while engaging in kotatsu shenanigans with Higuchi remains, as well as the core beats of exploring the school festival, chase scenes, Otome in the lead role, and Senpai sabotaging the play. The changes start with changing it from a play to a musical. There's obviously overlap between them, but this is a meaningful change because it makes better use of the medium of cinema. During scenes of the characters acting out the play, the book changes its form from prose to a screenplay, or I guess stage play in this case. The book is creating a distinction between the characters and the roles they are performing in these scenes, so it also goes by the name of the character they play, not of the actor they are. The movie is supposed to have this distinction as well, but the characters already act dramatic and energetic, so having them perform theatrically wouldn't make a huge difference. The transition from Otome to Princess Daruma wouldn't have been as significant if it wasn't accompanied by musical numbers. But also, musicals are just fun. Maybe they just thought this would be a cool, silly idea and I'm trying to justify it as a big brain play of adapting material. It makes good use of the medium though, so even if I am overanalyzing, I'm objectively correct. Anyway, another big change comes from Don Underwear's love interest. In the movie, Don Underwear's fated lover was the school director while he was cross-dressing, and they decide that fate can dictate their love and give each other a chance. This is until circumstances happen, fish fall on their heads, and he falls for the person who stood beside him all this time. I think this version of the story gets messy in the best way toward the end. Songs keep starting and ending out of nowhere, everyone is confessing their feelings, and it just keeps getting more chaotic until a fish tornado storms in and resolves everything. It's a great time, and I love it, but the version of the love interest in the book manages to be cuter, and I love it too. In the book, Otome runs into a person who is running an elephant butt exhibit. It doesn't receive a lot of attention and feels like a weird random part of the world until she reveals that she too created this odd presentation because she met someone who described elephant butts when 2 apples fell on their heads. In case you missed it, her and Don Underwear are both running elaborate schemes to attract the attention of their fated lover, but are so preoccupied in running it that they don't notice the other person is doing the same thing. This is absolutely precious and feels like a rom-com condensed into a short story, and the conclusion, where both of their exhibits come together to reunite them, is fantastic. This makes the film's climax of this section almost completely different. I love them both for completely different reasons, so I won't say that one is inherently better than the other. I think the film version offers a neat surprise to people who have already read the book, while also giving the school director more to do with this story, since he falls a bit to the background in the novel. Before we close things off, there are some smaller changes that don't significantly affect the story, but I thought they were interesting enough to mention, so here they are. In the film, the school director is a bit of a narc who wants to maintain control over the school festival. He still cares about the student body and appears much more sympathetically after the festival ends, but he's a bit sleazy, whereas in the book he's a lot more mature and seems to have the safety of everyone in mind. He's also much more laid back and even talks about wishing he could participate in the festival himself. During the drinking contest, Rihaku is a depressed older man who has lost sight of what it means to drink for the sake of having a good time. While in the book, he seems more like a jolly geezer who contradicts the scary reputation he's created for himself. It's a funny reveal, and I like this characterization, but I think I prefer how the film explores this character by the end of the story. Almost every time exposition happens in the movie, it is accompanied by colorful, cartoony visuals that are really fun, especially since the alternative would just be watching a character as they talk. Again, this feels like when you're reading and imagining the descriptions from the book. The Hot Pot Showdown is completely exaggerated and comedic in the movie, but in the book it presents it like a fight for their lives. It's still comedic for the audience because of the absurdity of dying over food, over a book, but the framing is far more serious in the novel than the movie. All these changes are pretty small, but I think they're meaningful. Some don't necessarily make the story better or worse, they're just different lenses to present the story with. By far, the most important change to the source material is that of making the 4 anecdotes take place over a single night. This This makes the plot more linear and digestible, but more importantly, it also ties into one of the major themes of the movie, being interconnectedness. Throughout the film, we constantly see and are reminded of the connections between people. In the first section, we are introduced to a sleazy man who collects erotic art who also happens to be the father of the bride whose wedding kicks off the movie. The man mentions a tornado that ran through his carp farm, destroying his business and leaving him with a massive debt to Rihaku. He appears in each section, but in part 3, the tornado that stole his carps returns them while also uniting Don Underwear and the director of the play. As this happens, he is lying in bed with a cold he received from Hanuki. This tornado came from Rihaku and is the same tornado that united Don Underwear and director Sleaze that is given in a flashback in part 3. Going back to the wedding, the father of the groom is celebrating his birthday party, but he's a bit depressed. But he also gets cheered up by the Sophist dance, which Otome learns at a party she went to earlier that night. She then learns that these older men created the dance many years ago while also learning of Rihaku's reputation, which brings all of these people and more to his train car for a drinking contest. Even Hanuki and Higuchi connect to their respective characters in the Tatami Galaxy, and the God of Used Books resembles a particularly mischievous character from that show as well. This God of Used Books also makes the themes of connectedness more explicit. He goes on a dense and initially confusing rant about connecting classic works of literature to each other while describing the used book market like an ocean. Characters are introduced for quite a while before their story becomes relevant to the plot, but their presence just fades into the background. They are a part of this world and will react to it as the night unfolds. But the connections between these characters comes to the forefront when Otome confronts Rihaku for the second time. He is ill and feels hopelessly depressed, as no one has comforted him in his isolation. But Otome comes to remind him that he is not alone. He starts the movie coughing, and when Hanuki drinks from his cup, gets a cold that spreads to the director and Todo, who go on to spread it to others and others until it seems that the entire world has fallen under. The life he leads, one in which he takes and gives, where the people around him have their lives changed from his actions, is not one of isolation. This life, like all others, is one carved by connections with other people, and alone as he may feel, he just needed a reminder of the impact he can have on those around him. This is a genuinely touching moment that brings forth all the connections the movie has been working toward. This is an excellent movie to watch and keep rewatching because on every viewing I notice new connections I didn't before. It's a movie that keeps unraveling without getting stale. A Yuasa onion. This theme of being connected is completely absent from the book, at least explicitly. The book never calls attention to it, so although the characters are bonded by their illness, it never connects the dots like the film does. And that's why I think it's a brilliant adaptation. It looks at the source material and elevates it in a way that allows you to read the narrative through the creative minds of the artists behind it. And by condensing this life-changing adventure into a single night, it feels like everyone could blossom relationships and change their lives too. The world is already out there. All it takes is the first step.